everyone, I'm John O'Connor. This is my show, exhibition, Self-Avoiding Walks. Thank you for coming.
I curated the show. I'm Richard Whitten. I'm one of the professors here at Rhode Island College.
I thought I'd say a little bit about the title of the show. So Self-Avoiding Walks, it relates to, or it comes from like the idea of it's a mathematical process that's connected to this idea of random walks, but it's slightly different. The idea that if you were to map or chart a random sequence of events, the only factor that you could predict is that each movement is dictated by the previous condition. So if you were to go walk randomly in a certain space, and in mathematics it's on a grid, then you would look at the previous state, so where say the person is positioned, and then the conditions at that position would dictate where they would go next. And a self-avoiding walk is this idea that within that randomness you're still sort of self-aware and you're trying to avoid the path that you've already taken. So I like the idea that it was kind of connected to this idea that's in a lot of the works in the show, of kind of sequential actions, things that are kind of, I'm attempting to kind of map things that feel random or don't have a kind of order to them. But also in some of the newer works that I'm making, there's a sense of kind of exploring cause and effect, and a kind of incremental transformation over time, whether it's like, in an individual, like a person that changes, or if it is kind of mapping something that feels like it's a gradual, slow transformation when one state kind of dissolves into the next without us being aware. So a lot of my drawings are kind of attempts to sort of locate those moments when something is transformed from one state into the next. So self-avoiding walks, I thought was the first thing I first read about it, I thought it was just sounded interesting, avoiding yourself on a walk, but it actually has it's actually like a sort of area of mathematics which attempts to kind of track randomness, like I said, but only through the kind of preconditions of the one step before the next. So then I can say just quickly, then the works at the front sort of set the tone, and I know that these are small drawings, colored pencil on paper, and each of them is a question that would be asked of someone that potentially has memory loss. So it ties a little bit into my past, where I had some relatives that had, or a close relative that had Alzheimer's. So sort of dealt with how her memory degraded over time. And so I've thought a lot about perceptions of the world, space we're in through memory. But also I thought these were taken out of context, are kind of funny. If like who are you? What's your name? What year is it? Who's the president? So these things are kind of get at this idea of like a fundamental truth. If you know these things, then you understand where you are at that particular time. And I drew each of these with my eyes closed. So I just grabbed a pencil, closed my eyes, and scribbled the name, the words on the paper, and then used that as a kind of, so it wasn't like a clear, like I didn't want to plan the text too much. I wanted it to be sort of get lost in the language a little bit. And then I went in and filled in around it and kind of like embellished the pattern. But I like the idea that the legibility of it might be a little different, that it'd be a little bit slower to read than it would be if we're just like a font. But maybe I'll start with the one down in the back corner. It's a little simpler. And then I could move to those that have more complexity. So
I'll follow you.
So this came from, I guess my motivation for it was, there's like such a proliferation of serial killer shows and things like that. Also the idea of the serial killer is sort of, romanticized, and, we kind of think of them not as obviously there's like, I know the violence might be glorified in some ways, but they become these kind of mythical figures in some way, where they're on television, you're reading about them, and there's this sort of allure to the person that is committing those crimes. So I started thinking about, thinking about what would lead someone to do that, but also thinking about what they would be like as human beings in some way. Not in a way to try to necessarily like sympathize with them, but maybe, what would it be like to be that person in a really specific way, not through a kind of representation on like film or books or things like that, or just in the media in general. So I started thinking about, how could I connect to that that sort of figure as a person. And so then I just thought to look up last meals, like what did, each of these serial killers were executed, so what did they have as their last meal? And it was really interesting because as I looked into it, I thought, it's like we all would, I've had almost all of these things that they've eaten. So there's some kind of flattening of the experience between this really, charged and kind of almost unreal figure and also really like an evil figure, but then, my reality too, I know what it's like to eat cheese doodles and Coke and things like that. So the choices were really, I thought, fascinating because they were very human, and it was a kind of way to empathize with those figures in that way. And so I thought of it as if, I was trying to kind of follow, almost like it's a diet plan or something, like you were trying to follow what these figures, ate as their last choices. And so I just picked sort of more famous serial killers, but I didn't list their last names. So I wanted it to feel at first maybe like you would look at it and you wouldn't know who these people were. And then I was sort of thinking if I were to eat all of their foods, all these things that they had as their last meals one day over the course of a week, by the end, maybe there's this feeling that this actual junk food could kill you. But at the same time, you're sort of like consuming something of, that person's choices in this, like, the time at which their life would end, and that they had done, that they had kind of done to other people as well. So there's a weird sort of cycle in that, I thought. And I think that, I was hoping that it would sort of read, maybe people would enter it in a way that felt like kind of funny, like it's, you're just eating junk food. And a lot of people do, they kind of look at it more like it's, they're like, oh, I love eating that stuff. And so they're feeling their connection to it, for that one moment, you would know what it feels like to be, John Wayne Gacy or someone like that.
So your research is really quite fascinating here, but at this point, what you've discussed is sort of all of a verbal research. But you've made a big drawing out of it. So, and some of these drawings are radially structured. Mm-hmm. This one is related or arranged as rows from top to bottom. In fact, when I first come to this, I look at it more as if I'm seeing stripes, and I'm seeing something like that game Concentration, all of those little symbols that make up some word. How did you come to say that this subject matter needed to be stripes as opposed to circles?
Well, I was thinking it's sort of like a calendar or like a date book at first. So I was thinking in this case of, making, I became really interested in the idea of reading a drawing from left to right, top to bottom. That it's sort of the way you read a page, so you look at a way we read anything that's text-based, but, or tells a story. So that started, that's how I started the drawing. And I do just kind of visually like kind of patterns and kind of, sort of finding sort of, weird shapes in between letters and sort of, like, I was really always interested in like negative spaces and kind of you put two sort of representational things together and there's a kind of strange shape that results in the middle. I felt like this is a little bit, all of my drawings kind of have that. There may be a real high level of specificity to the shape, but you can't recognize it, so it's an abstraction. So that's where some of this goes. I just kind of like the idea that I just would separate. So at first it was just a way to kind of treat it like it's top to bottom, left to right. It's like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday. But I just started it at the top, and I didn't really know exactly how it would work out. And then once I drew the top one, then I thought, okay, I'll flip it so there's like a kind of a pattern between light and dark. So that's how that started to kind of unfold. And so that composition happened sort of naturally, but I just thought it would be a little bit boring if I just do straight lines across. So I did kind of trace, I didn't plan any of this out so much, I didn't like sketch it out. I just started doing it, and then, because you can even see it gets a little smaller as it gets toward the bottom. So I was interested to see how the composition and how like the sort of filling in between the lines would make it look more interesting than just a kind of lined up grid.
So what I'm seeing is that there's a balance between like an outside structure, like a
Yeah.
date book, because this is like a weekly date
Yeah,
book.
yeah,
Not,
that's-
not quite a calendar, but,
Yeah.
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then things that you do during those days in the week. But then there's also a level of chance in terms of how you put the piece together, because you start at the top. You didn't actually do what everybody says to do right away, which is to lay out the whole piece, have the composition
Yeah.
down at the
No,
beginning.
I didn't sketch it out. I started with the first, did Tuesday, and then I thought, okay, I want to do all day, so I'll have to make sure I fit them in, but I did incremental. I just want to see what it looks like as it goes,
Is that level of chance the same in a piece like this? Here we're working with this concentric circle or radial structure. This one almost seems like you needed to figure it out before you did it, a little bit more than that. Is that the case?
This one, no, probably even more the
Less.
opposite. Yeah, it's interesting. I started, so this one I thought, I mean, very, very dumb starting point, just like this.
In the middle?
Yeah, start in the middle, but also the idea that the United States is sort of central to everything. So, in many ways, but politically. So that I just traced around the U.S. So that's that's the country just turned on its side. And then I thought, well, how do I begin to talk about this idea of the sort of ramifications of this form and how does it begin? And it actually ties into the negative space, interestingly, I think, because, so I just started in the center and drew the, U.S. And then I traced the contours of the state and then of the edges of the border. And then I flipped them and repeated them. And then I would repeat them again and again. So they began to kind of, it's sort of this idea that the shape of the U.S. began to sort of mutate in some way.
So you're generating shapes from that.
Generating shapes from that one. And it becomes like sort of like, I guess maybe you recognize this as something at first. But I didn't want it to be horizontal because that would be too recognizable. So slightly shifting it on its axis would just sort of change it a little bit. But then it becomes more of like an abstraction, as it gets out to these areas. And so then I sort of moved from that center point, and then I just sort of thought, well, like with that, I'm interested in like making each of these layers different. And I really get interested in like these different types of patterns, op art. I really love the kind of slow drawing process. So these take a long time and they're really incremental, like I was saying at the beginning. So I don't really plan many of them out, if any at all. And then I move step by step. So I got to this point, and then I thought, well, what could happen next? And I thought, well, maybe I'll just create a structure from that kind of turns it back into a circle or closer into a circle. And so I closed it off. And so some of the parts around up to this point are just like I was responding to it visually. I wasn't thinking like, it doesn't have a conceptual connection to the beginning. It's more like, there's like a little explosion in the center and then it sort of slow, like in the water, it sort of diffuses. I could talk about this one real quick too.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if you don't mind. So this one I did have to change. So this was an idea kind of about it was called the Linda problem. I should have done a little research before. Originally it was called the Linda problem. I changed it to the John problem. But it was this idea that we sort of attribute meaning to things that are meaningless or random, how to frame it, but basically I took this from it. So instead I just switched it to John. So say, the original question was, Linda is 31 years old, single, bold, and very smart. And then loves cooking and majored in art. So I did change it a little bit actually. But the second question is, and Linda's a bank teller, likes to cook, and was politically active in high school, and also studied history. And then you ask the question, is Linda more likely to be, a
Republican or a Democrat?
or something along those lines, and it's much easier to think we attribute meanings because she went to school for these things. We begin to think, of course, that would be more likely to be true. But in fact, the sort of simpler answer is this: that the probability is if you remove a lot of those external conditions or those additional things, then it would be more likely that she would be, X.
So if you put 6 objects down on the ground, and then you put 6 objects down here, and you drew arrows down like that, and they were random, and then asked people to explain what the connection was, people will come up with stories. So you're exploring that connection making that human beings do. And I think that's the case with all of your pieces. We look at the words, we try to figure it out. Your organization tells me what to think about. It's like those horizontal lines say, this is all about one person. Here, I get much more of a grid. It's almost like a crossword puzzle. So I'm able to sort of go vertically and make connections and horizontally and make connections.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, so basically that is like essentially the Linda problem is like attributing meaning to things that are not necessarily meaningful or But yeah, so the first question you asked though is if it ever changes. So this, I originally had just a rectangle of paper. And I thought, and I drew this, I wanted it to sort of feel like it was, I don't know why, I loved like video games and this kind of old school 3D lettering. So I wanted it to sort of like feel like it had a different font, like the font was kind of have a different spatial feeling. But anyway, I started drawing it and then I realized as I went that I was running out of space. So instead I took the actual paper and then a second piece and began to cut out, to do them on strips and then glue them back into it. So that's how the shape of the drawing, out of necessity, became what it is. It was originally just going to be a rectangle. So that's where even if the text is really kind of clear, you know, it still has a kind of, it's a challenge to make it fit, but I really love the idea that it just turned into something else.
You're, you're solving compositional issues, and I think it makes the image much richer because it puts in this element that isn't predicted. Do you ever have a piece that just goes the way that you think it's supposed to? And would you trust it?
Yeah, no, probably not. I like to not know where it's going to go.
Because I've always said that if a painting just falls together, I think it's too easy.
Yeah, I don't ever have an idea of where it's going to go.
And it gives a richness that because it's unpredictable even to the maker.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for this. Thanks for coming to the show.